It is my great honor to welcome you all today to this, the sixth in the series of annual lectures on portraits of courage, arranged by the Maharaja Dilip Singh Centenary Trust in collaboration with the Imperial War Museum. I would like to thank everyone for taking time to come. I know its time is very important. This is the seventh event out of a total of 16 during the week dedicated to Anglo-Sikh heritage. Other events during this week have included Gatka displays, talks, exhibitions, guided tours, and those to still come include gallery talks, picnic Sikh style, a refurbished museum, and hidden connections. I hope that you will be able to come to some of those events this week. Previous lectures here at the Imperial War Museum have covered topics as diverse as Sikhs in Flanders, the epic battle of Saragarhi, the Sikhs at Gallipoli, 150 years of Sikh association with the British Army, and the Sikh BC winners. Tonight's talk promises to be just as fascinating. To welcome our keynote speaker for the evening, I would like to welcome the chairman of the IWM, Sir Peter Squire. Air Chief Marshal Sir Peter Squire has been a trustee of this museum since December 2001 and deputy chairman since March 2004. He was appointed chairman from June of this year to replace the outgoing chairman, Admiral Sir Jock Slater. Sir Peter was commissioned into the RAF in 1966, the year I set foot in this country, and we brought some India into this country. We had Miss World, who was an Indian, and we won the World Cup as well, of course, don't forget that. And perhaps we have to talk about that for another 40 years. And he has held a series of roles in increasing seniority both in the UK and Europe, culminating in his appointment as Chief of Air Staff from 2000 to 2003. He was Chief of the Air Staff during two of the most important operations in recent times, the operation against the Taliban and the ongoing campaign in Iraq. Among his many decorations is the Distinguished Flying Cross awarded in 1982. He is currently the Vice Chairman of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, having been appointed a Commissioner in 2003. I would now like to call on Sir Peter to come to the rostrum, both to welcome everyone and introduce our guest speaker for the evening. Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Peter Squire. Thank you.
Minister, my Lord, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Museum, it is indeed a great pleasure to welcome you here to Lambeth Road for this annual Portraits of Courage lecture. Tonight, we are, of course, looking at the history of a most famous military unit, the Rattray Sikhs. And this evening's event is dedicated to the memory of Lieutenant Colonel Colin McPhee, Military Cross, who sadly passed away last month. And I would, on behalf of the Museum, wish to extend our sincere condolences to the McPhee family for their loss. The Museum owes a great debt of gratitude to Colonel McPhee, particularly for the way in which in 1994 he donated to the Department of Documents here his own private papers, some 533 personal letters, but also those wonderful diaries, 39 of them, of his father, Colonel Donald McPhee. And together these wonderful documents provide a remarkable insight onto the life of the Rattray Sikhs for a continuous period from 1898 to 1947. Now, each lecture of this particular series has brought to the fore aspects often overlooked of the role of Sikh servicemen in the British Armed Forces. And this year, as we know, marks the 150th continuous year of service for the Rattray Sikhs. First raised in 1856 by Captain Thomas Rattray, the battalion served with great honour during both World Wars and also in many other conflicts, and continues today as the 3rd Battalion, the Sikh Regiment in the Indian Army. The battalion has, I'm delighted to say, retained very close connections to the Rattray family, and I'm delighted that this lecture this evening perpetuates that tradition. The lecture series, of course, is but one element of a continued and positive collaboration with the Maharaja Ranjit Singh Centenary Trust, and the museum is very conscious of the role that it has as custodian of a significant body of material which helps to place on record the contribution of Sikh soldiers, sailors and airmen during 2 world wars and sacrifices made since in the defence of democratic principles which are the hallmarks of British and Indian society today. Now, many of you will have been present here in June of this year, on the 2nd of June, when our President, His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent, unveiled a plaque in our atrium to record our inclusion as a museum in the Anglo-Sikh Heritage Trail. That trail is, of course, one of the Centenary Trust's key initiatives, intended to promote an appreciation of the strong and common heritage that we have by highlighting items central to Sikh British history and culture, and to demonstrate, and it all goes to demonstrate, the importance of remembering together our past. And the Imperial War Museum is honoured indeed to be a prime site in such a worthwhile project. 3 pieces from our collections feature on the trail here at Lambeth Road. The first 2, the Kara, worn by Prakash Singh and his VC, awarded for selfless gallantry in Burma during the bitter fighting against the Japanese armed forces at Arakan in 1943. Both the Kara and the VC are on display in our VC George Cross Gallery, which will be open throughout this evening. We as a museum remain most grateful to his family for placing their trust in our guardianship of those particular treasures. The third item is a full-scale figure of a Sikh soldier, epitomising the Mesopotamian campaign from 1914 to 18, and that's to be seen in our permanent World War I gallery. Now, a key responsibility, I believe, of this museum is to encourage the development of new audiences, reaching out to groups who may mistakenly believe that there's nothing here on offer for them. And we look forward to further collaborating with the Trust to find fresh means of incorporating into our galleries and indeed into other activities material of the Sikh martial heritage. We're also always looking for ways to make our own rich archival collections more accessible to the general public, to help to ensure that all visitors, and not just new generations of British Sikhs, that they appreciate the full extent of our shared history. Now, I've already mentioned the close bond between the Rattray family, one of Scotland's most distinguished clans, and the Rattray Sikhs since the battalion's formation 150 years ago. And it's a particular pleasure, therefore, for me to introduce our speaker, Rallian Rattray, this evening. Mr. Rattray joined recently the University of Dundee, where he lectures at the Centre for Energy, Petroleum and Mineral Law and Policy. He is a direct descendant of Captain Thomas Rattray, and I can think of nobody, therefore, more appropriate to talk to us today about the Rattray Sikh Regiment.
Good evening. Thank you very much for that warm welcome. It gives me great pleasure and makes me feel really quite humble to be standing here talking about brave hearts and lions. Certainly the stories of the regiment, the heritage of the regiment is something myself and my brothers experienced throughout our childhood. It spurred an interest in me in history in general and in the history of the Sikhs and of our own Scottish heritage in particular. I would like to emphasise, though, despite being an academic from the University of Dundee, this is not going to be an academic examination of the relationship. It's going to be more about a personal reflection of my understanding and of my perceptions of some of the links and similarities between the Highland Scots in particular and the Sikhs. So, if we look at the slides here, they're probably worthy a little bit of explanation. The band across the top is made of photographs that were made whilst filming for the BBC about Alistair MacCulloch, a very famous Highland Jacobite general. If we move down, we see on the right-hand side the Gordon Highlanders Museum. We are very grateful to them for permission to use this picture here, a famous battle scene with the Gordon Highlanders. On the left-hand side, the British Museum gave us permission to use the picture of Ranjit Singh. Down to the bottom here, my great-grandfather in the centre, Thomas Rattray, who raised the regiment, and on the far left-hand side of the screen, the very famous portrait of the drums of the Rattray Sikhs taken in 1911 during the Royal Darbar. And on the right-hand side, the latest reconstruction carried out by Robin Stanley earlier this year, where we got the present-day Sikhs to stand in a similar position. So bringing history up to date. Right, the raising of the Rattray Sikhs. My great-grandfather, Thomas Rattray, was given the unusual honour of being selected to be captain of the Viceroy's bodyguard in 1855. And we can assume, I think, that from this position he was noted by the Viceroy and was chosen to raise a police battalion in December 1855. He moved to Lahore, where he started raising this regiment between April and September of 1856. The story we were always told as children was one of his recruiting tactics was to offer to wrestle with any of the prospective candidates. I'm not quite sure what he did when he lost, but it was apparently a very effective way of getting his point across. What struck me as interesting in looking at this comparison, or one of the really interesting things for me, was when we look at the Rattray history. The Rattrays are a relatively small clan, possibly might not even be classed as a clan, but certainly a relatively small family in the Eastern Highlands of Scotland, were, like many of the Highland clans in 1745, took part on the Jacobite side in the last uprising against the British government of the time. And it struck me as particularly interesting that Thomas's great-grandfather was appointed as a major of foot in the Ogilvie Regiment, part of the Athol Brigade. And in fact, the depiction on the right-hand side is a copy of his commission, signed by Charles Edward Stewart. Left-hand side, a modern interpretation of the Battle of Culloden, again done for some filming with the BBC. James Rattray fought in a number of battles against the British Army then, particularly at Preston Pans, Falkirk, and lastly at Culloden. I'm sure many of you will know Culloden was a disastrous battle for the Highland armies and really marked the end of a way of life in the Highlands, but marked the beginning of a new way of life for many of the Highlanders who then joined the British Army. In James Rattray's case, his escapade ended in Newgate Prison in London, where he was arraigned for high treason. Fortunately for him, there were other people at work, and he managed to get acquitted. We're not quite sure how he pulled that off, but anyway, he did walk free. If we go back a little bit to the Sikh recruits' background, a famous story that was always recounted to me by my father was how Thomas Rattray was particularly focused on the Punjab particularly focused because of the qualities, the martial qualities of the Sikhs, and the fact that there was a body of trained soldiers already available. And so the strategy there was very much focused on raising this trained body of men. The other story that we were raised on was of a famous character in the early Ratro Sikhs, Hukam Singh, who at the age of 35 or 36 was very disgruntled to be continuously passed over by the recruiting officers, and eventually he marched up to my great-grandfather, and said, "Look at me, I have a beard, you have a beard, it hasn't done you any harm, why will you not recruit me? Come and I'll show you my credentials." And he apparently asked him to come inside the tent. He lifted his shirt and he said, "You see these wounds here? I got these at Mudki and Farajar. I was true to my salt then, and I will be true to my salt for you if you hire me." So with that sort of introduction, you can rest assured he was recruited, and will played a very famous part in the early history of the Ratro Sikhs, which we'll touch on a little bit later. Going back to the sort of theme of comparing and contrasting and trying to understand the common roots, we can see that in fact there are many points where cultures are very similar, where the military martial heritage is extremely similar, and this extends across a number of themes. In 1699, interestingly, was the creation of the Khalsa, the beginnings of the Sikhs. Already the Sikhs, and particularly during this raised period where they were asserting themselves and preventing domination, they relied very heavily on their sort of martial background. And a particularly strong part of this martial background was the reverence for individual valor and single combat. Now if we look at the Highlanders, they had also a very long history. In fact, starting off in pre-Christian times with a sort of druidic approach, much of that remained part of the customs in the Highlands, even through the early Christianity period. But the Highlands is also marked out with this move towards Protestantism, a simplifying of faith, and I think there are some similarities there in approach. But looking at the martial background, the Highlanders bore many of similar characteristics to the Sikhs, fighting against, unfortunately for Scotland, themselves much of the time, but also against a general Anglo-Saxon, if you like, sort of incursion. It was a clash of cultures, so they were fighting against that. The Celts also were, though, very much, their traditions were very much focused on the warrior, and the cult of individual valor and single combat was very much part of the Celtic martial tradition. And if you look at battles like the Battle of Killiecrankie in 1689, a few years before the formation of the Khalsa, and you look at the Highland regiments where 1,800 Highland troops defeated a government army of 4,000, the Highland clan regiments were led by the clan officers from the front. And the highest casualties in the Highland clan regiments, the Jacobite armed regiments, were suffered by the gentlemen of the clan and the leaders of the clan. So the men expected to be led from the front. And that was very much part of the Highland tradition. In many of the Gaelic songs, there's an allusion to this. One I particularly liked, "Your Inheritance is Great Fame in Arms," a traditional West Highland song, composed, I think, sometime in the early 16th century. Moving on to the traditional weapons, it struck me when we were in Bathinda in January this year, and we were very privileged to look around the battalion museum, to see this display of, on the left-hand bottom of your screen, the weapons from Maharaja Ranjit Singh's army, and the parallels and the similarities between the weapons, traditional weapons used by the Sikhs, and the traditional weapons used by the Highlanders were very striking. A small round shield, a sword being a main part of the weapon. In the case of the Highlanders, also dirks, but also the Sikhs have dirks, slightly differently formed, short swords, very similar approach to the weaponry. Moving on a little bit more towards seeing the Rattray Sikhs in action, the little cameo at the top there was from 2005 with the regiment on parade in Bathinda. But if we look, I have not done this necessarily in a particularly scientific way. As I said, this is a sort of personal reflection, but I've picked out some of the battle honours from the Rattray Sikhs. Ara, you remember Hukam Singh and his the reluctance to recruit him. Hukam Singh had under his command 50 Sikhs, and he defended around 20 Europeans in a house against 3,000 Indian mutineers. He defended them for 8 days. He was certainly true to his salt, because there were great enticements put to him to abandon his duty and to leave the people he was defending, but he completely refused to do so. My great-grandfather wrote in his personal diaries that it was harder to find a braver soldier or a better man than Hukam Singh, and he reflected there on the fact that he nearly was not recruited. If we move on to reflect more on their professional side, the First and Second Afghanistan War, the 45th was entrusted to the rear guard, and part of the success of the successful withdrawal of the British Army there, I think, could be said to be ascribed to their professional conduct in the field. Moving on to 1897, and again a personal link for myself. My grandfather now, Haldane Bernie Rattray, was the second lieutenant when the regiment was moved as part of the Malakand Field Force into the northwest frontier, and he and 240 Sikhs defended Chakdara Fort for a significant period of time against 14,000 armed Pathans. And a recent historian, Michael Barthorpe, who wrote the book Frontiers Ablaze, likened it and has compared and contrasted this action with Rorke's Drift, which was in a similar era. And his remarks are that Chakdara was held 10 times longer, against far greater odds, and the opposition were armed and knew how to use rifles. So he argues that Rorke's Drift got a lot more focus, and Chakdara, the defence, was not so greatly recognised. Again, moving on to 1917, and the reason I've chosen this is my grandfather, by now Lieutenant Colonel commanding the regiment, was part of the fight in what is now present-day Iraq, Kut, and the regiment was ordered as part of a general advance to move forward. After suffering large numbers of casualties, my grandfather was cut off with 50 other men under his command, and none of them came out. In fact, the casualties on that day were really quite staggering. I think, certainly for myself as a non-soldier, non-military person, to look at the percentage of people that were killed or injured is truly staggering. Out of the 450 that went in on the last day, only 122 came out uninjured. Truly staggering statistics, I think. I forgot to mention, by the way, that the little picture on the bottom there, my grandfather is on the far left with a bandage around his neck. He was injured in the defence. That was taken just after the defence of Chakdara. At that point, another little interesting point in history is he became fairly good friends with Winston Churchill, who was covering the Malakand expedition and wrote the book, Malakand Field Force. On the same theme, and talking about acts of bravery, one of the things that really struck me in the regiment is how proud they are of their history and how they bring this as pop forward and talk about it all the time. All the ranks in the regiment talk about it and understand it. In the Battalion Museum was one of their old colours from the British period, and we're proud to have been presented one of their modern colours. But the battalion has 10 battle honours, 5 theatre honours, and a unit citation. Innumerable individuals in the battalion have distinguished themselves in the field of combat, and this continues, I should emphasise, to the present day. The 3rd Sikhs are very much an active frontline infantry regiment. 159 pre-independence gallantry wards, and that theme, as I said, continues. Mr. Sandhu has written a book which has recently been published in India, where he says the Sikh Regiment is the most highly decorated regiment in the Indian Army. I thought I'd just pick out again, because this is a personal reflection, I'll pick out a few of in reading the history of the Rattray Sikhs, some of the citations for conspicuous gallantry, and I chose Tirah because it's obviously very close to my heart, seeing as my grandfather was in command of the defence. But there were 7 awards for conspicuous gallantry. Of course, at this time, there were different awards for British officers or British troops to native troops, so I haven't looked at the award itself, but rather what the people did. And when you read these accounts, you realise these people were truly brave. Jemadar Uttam Singh, in command of 20 other men, checked the advance of the advancing Pathan tribesmen for 20 minutes. Now this was vital because it allowed large parts of the rest of the regiment to get into the defensive position in the fort. Sepoy Prem Singh kept in communication. Now if you reading the accounts of this, of how he had to run across open ground to get into the signalling tower, they used the heliograph system, but he exposed himself to rifle fire regularly over 3 days in order to maintain communications, this vital communications with headquarters. Sepoy Jahan Singh, again an individual act here, responded on his own to a call from the hospital for somebody to help them because they were under extreme pressure from the enemy. And he attacked single-handed. He responded to that call and attacked single-handed. Getting to the end and bringing us up to date. One of the things that makes me personally very proud is the link between the Rattray family that you've already heard about, myself, my brothers, my cousins. We are very proud of this link. We were brought up on it. One of the reflections we see is I'm not quite sure how to work this one. I thought it dropped. We should be able to. There's a little video here, so. Bottom left. No? Excuse me, I'm going to have to just put my glasses on. I can see you all very well, but a little bit closer is a bit more difficult. I'm afraid we're probably going to have to do without the video clip because I don't see how to trim it off. Which is a shame. But never mind. The point I was going to make is that what makes us very proud is the fact that the Sikh battalion, particularly the 3rd Sikh and the Rattray Sikhs, have taken on board many of the Highland traditions and have, in particular, been very keen to use the martial instrument. I believe the only one listed under the Geneva Convention as an instrument of war, the pipes. And for us personally, I don't know if you can see it, but they wear the Rattray tartan plaid, which I know was organised by my father. He got permission from the chief of Clan Rattray to use this plaid as part of the regimental colours. continuing on the 150th anniversary, and this, again, the personal reflections, because there were so many wonderful events and we took part in so many wonderful meetings. One that really struck home with me was again Hukam Singh, and the fact that descendants of Hukam Singh came to the commemoration day. They were very proud of their relationship with the regiment. They had a picture with them. We spent a great time talking with them and sharing our sort of common thoughts on the fact that we were linked in history in this really quite extraordinary way. The top picture is a picture of myself and other descendants of Thomas Rattray. We were so warmly met, and the hospitality of the Sikhs and of the regiment was truly stupendous. We enjoyed the most wonderful 3 days with the battalion, and it was a truly remarkable experience for us personally. So I thought I'd finish off with what to me was a very moving part of the official parade at Bathinda in January, and that was the marching off. Oops. No, I'm afraid I failed. But that simply marching off of the regiment, and the tune they were playing was Auld Lang Syne, and that really struck home to me as a truly fitting link between the Rattray Sikhs, the Scottish heritage of my family, and the heritage of the 3rd Sikh Battalion. As I said, it wasn't my presentation that is not academic, but I did try to acknowledge all the sources that I've used, and I'll talk over this because I think you can see it then, it lasts quite a long time. But I tried to acknowledge all the sources I've used, but it is a personal reflection, and a lot of emotion is attached to it because we were so closely associated with the regiment, and we were brought up with this as part of our heritage. And to be there present, and we were accompanied by a retired officer of the British Army who told me that the parade was very similar in structure, very recognisable as broadly the same that the British Army would use today. But as a military man, I couldn't judge that, but as an emotional person, I certainly felt very emotional at this ceremony. So I'll leave the regiment to finish off, and I will be quite happy to take any questions that anyone might like to raise. Yes?
Having such a proud heritage, how does it affect you now in everyday life?
I think one of the things that really strikes home, particularly in this examination of our common heritage, the fact that actually we're so similar. And when you examine, I think what really strikes home with me is how similar people are generally, but how similar in particular our two heritages are. And I think that is a great personal lesson for me, because we're living in an increasingly sort of connected world, and understanding that in many respects we are very, very similar, and we should acknowledge that and understand that. But also I think probably even more important for me personally was the fact that history is an important part of the present, and the fact that we are all products of history, And I think most of us, most people are actually much better off if they understand their history and understand how it's developed. I'm not saying we should live in the past, but I think by understanding the history we actually get a better understanding of what life's about and where we came from. Yes? Hello? I can't hear you.
I wonder if you'll be able to share your thoughts, because leading from your last comments, I'm just, well, I couldn't help but just reflect on the whole debate today surrounding the issue of multiculturalism, and bearing in mind the close connection that the Sikh Regiment has had with the UK and perhaps other regiments in different parts of the world. I welcome your thoughts on how you would relate this to the wider debate of multiculturalism.
Well, I can only really reflect on that, on my own understanding of history. And in fact, if you look at Britain, Britain has been multicultural since the Romans left. Because after the Romans came in, they brought a lot of different culture into the British Isles. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Anglo-Saxons came in to the UK. The Danes came into the UK. They all brought in different cultural values. And in fact, I think Britain's real strength is the fact that it has got this multicultural approach. It has been truly adaptive. It has been a melting pot for Europe, historically. And now, as the world extends, this is just continuing. This tradition is continuing. My personal thoughts on it are that, really link back to my previous statement, that, you know, if you understand your history, if you understand where you come from, I think it makes you stronger in your understanding, and you can then move on and understand better how to live life today, because nothing is exactly the same, but many of the patterns remain. And personally, I believe that if you understand your history, you understand how history connects between people, your likelihood of being able to work together is far better. Yes?
Ronnie, did you find when you visited the Ratray Sikhs on their 150th anniversary that they were equally aware of their connection with Scotland as you are with the regiment? Was there a similar affection for where their roots had come from?
Yes, I think there was. There was one of the things that I sort of alluded to earlier on. The fact the Battalion Museum had all these objects that they kept, and they moved with the battalion. But what struck me in particular was talking to some of the other ranks, in the non-officered ranks in the army, in the battalion, and how interested they were, and the fact that they also understood a large part of their history. And that struck me. The depth of their understanding of the link between the Sikh Regiment in particular, or the Ratray Sikhs in Scotland, I think was a little bit shaky, but the links, what struck me was the links with the past. They were happy to understand that and to take that forward and to have it as a constructive historical link. And the fact they were really proud of it. The fact, I think, that, you know, the Battalion Museum carries the colours, the British colours, with the Union Jack in the corner as a proud part of their heritage, I think really shows maturity and understanding, and the fact that they have understood that history is in the past. We need to understand it, but we can move forward. So I think, yes, I was impressed by the level of knowledge in the regiment.
It's the most interesting talk. Whether the very close connection which we've retained with the regiment is unique between Britain and Indian regiments, or whether there are other such connections with other regiments similar to your own one.
I believe there are, and there certainly are other families that are very closely associated with the Indian Army in general. and there are other families connected with regiments. I'm not aware of any other regiment, and I may be wrong, but I'm not aware of any other regiment quite the same as this, where my understanding is in 1947, the men of the regiment raised a petition to keep the name of Rattrays, and we are very proud, as Rattrays we're very proud of that, but it came from the ranks of the regiment itself, and the request for that name to remain part of the regiment came from the men themselves. So I'm not aware of anything quite the same, but I am aware that there are very, very strong links between certain families and the Indian Army in general and other regiments in particular.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.